My cousin used my identity to get a credit card and maxed it out. The federal identity theft charges gave him time to think. Everything started falling apart when I got that first phone call from the credit card company asking about charges in Vegas. I was sitting in my apartment eating cereal for dinner, wondering why anyone would think I had money to blow at casinos when I was living paycheck to paycheck. The woman on the phone kept asking me to verify purchases I had never made, and my stomach started churning as the amounts kept getting bigger. $23,000 in charges over the past 6 months, all on a card I never applied for. The worst part was hearing my own name and social security number being read back to me while I stared at my empty bank account. I kept telling the representative that this had to be some kind of mistake, that I never even applied for their card, but she just kept reading off more charges. Expensive restaurants, electronics stores, even a motorcycle rental that made my head spin. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, and I felt like someone had just punched me in the gut. When I hung up, I immediately called my credit monitoring service and discovered 3 more cards had been opened in my name. Each one was maxed out to the limit, and the total damage was over $60,000. I spent the next 4 hours on the phone with different companies, filing fraud reports and trying to piece together how this could have happened. The customer service representatives all asked the same questions about who might have access to my personal information, and one name kept coming to mind even though I didn't want to believe it. My cousin had been staying with me off and on for the past year after losing his job and getting evicted from his apartment. He was family, and I thought I was doing the right thing by helping him get back on his feet. But he had been acting strange lately, staying out all night and coming home with new clothes and gadgets he claimed he got from friends. I noticed some of my mail had been going missing, and now pieces of a horrible puzzle were starting to fit together. The next morning I drove to the police station and filed a report, but the officer seemed more interested in his coffee than my story. He handed me a stack of paperwork and told me identity theft cases were hard to prosecute unless I had solid proof of who did it. I explained my suspicions about my cousin, but he just shrugged and said family disputes were complicated. Walking out of that station, I felt completely powerless and betrayed by both my cousin and the system that was supposed to protect me. I decided to do some investigating on my own and started checking all my cousin's social media accounts. What I found made my blood run cold: photos of him at expensive restaurants, wearing designer clothes, and even sitting on a motorcycle that looked exactly like the one from the rental charges. He was flaunting the stolen money right there for everyone to see, and I couldn't believe how stupid and arrogant he was being. The dates on the photos matched up perfectly with the fraudulent charges, and I finally had the proof I needed. Confronting him was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, but I knew I couldn't let this slide. When I showed him the evidence, he initially tried to deny everything, claiming the photos were old and the clothes were borrowed. But when I started reading off specific charges with exact dates and amounts, his face went pale and he finally broke down. He admitted to everything, sobbing about how desperate he had been and how he never meant for things to go this far. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Listening to him explain how he had been collecting my mail and using my personal information for months. He had memorized my social security number from documents he found in my room, and he even admitted to going through my trash to find bank statements. The person I had trusted and tried to help had been systematically destroying my financial life while I slept under the same roof. I felt sick thinking about all the times I had worried about him and tried to help him find work. What made everything worse was that he kept trying to minimize what he had done, saying it was just money and that insurance would cover it. He couldn't understand that this wasn't just about money. It was about trust, family, and the fact that my credit was now completely ruined. I had been planning to buy a house within the next year, and now I couldn't even get approved for a store credit card. My dreams of homeownership and financial stability had been shattered by someone I loved and trusted. The legal process was a nightmare that dragged on for months, with lawyers and court dates and endless paperwork. I had to take time off work to meet with investigators and provide documentation for everything. The stress was affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to focus on anything else. Some days I felt so angry I couldn't think straight, and other days I just felt empty and hollow inside. My other family members were divided about the situation, with some supporting me and others saying I was being too harsh on someone who was struggling. The investigation revealed that my cousin had been much more sophisticated than I initially thought. He had set up fake email addresses, used different phone numbers, and even created fake employment records to qualify for some of the cards. The federal investigators told me this level of planning showed clear criminal intent, not just desperate mistakes. Learning about the extent of his deception made me question everything I thought I knew about him and wonder how long he had been planning this betrayal. 6 months later, federal agents arrested my cousin at his new apartment, which he had been paying for with my stolen money. Watching him get handcuffed and led away was surreal. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt guilty for being the reason a family member was going to prison. The charges included identity theft, credit card fraud, and wire fraud, carrying a potential sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. The severity of the charges shocked everyone in our family, who had expected this to be handled as a minor family dispute. During the trial, I had to testify about how his actions had affected my life, and it was emotionally devastating to relive everything in front of a courtroom full of strangers. The prosecutor painted a picture of calculated criminal behavior, while the defense attorney tried to portray my cousin as a desperate young man who made poor choices. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury convicted him on all charges after less than 2 hours of deliberation. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in federal prison, and I watched him break down crying as the bailiff led him away. Even though justice had been served, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Instead, I felt empty and sad about how our relationship had ended and how his choices had destroyed both our lives. The courtroom was filled with family members who were angry at both of us. Some blamed me for pressing charges, while others blamed him for betraying family trust. What nobody expected was the letter I received 3 months into his sentence. It was longer than anything he had ever written before, and it was clear he had been doing some serious thinking about what he had done. He didn't just apologize. He broke down exactly how his addiction to gambling had spiraled out of control and how he had justified stealing from me. The letter revealed that he had been gambling online for years, losing money he didn't have and digging himself deeper into debt. He explained that the identity theft had started small, with him using my information to get a small loan he planned to pay back quickly. But gambling addiction doesn't work that way, and every win made him bet more while every loss made him more desperate. What started as a temporary solution had become a full-blown criminal enterprise that consumed his entire life. Reading about his mental state during that time helped me understand his actions without excusing them. The most surprising part of the letter was his detailed plan for making things right. He had been working in the prison library, researching victim compensation programs and bankruptcy procedures. He had also been attending addiction counseling and had learned about the psychological factors that drove his behavior. The person who wrote that letter seemed completely different from the selfish, manipulative cousin I had known. Prison had given him something he had never experienced before: time to think without distractions. He wrote about how he spent hours every day thinking about what he had done to me and our family. He described the shame and guilt that kept him awake at night, and how he finally understood the real impact of his actions. The letter showed a level of self-awareness and remorse that I had never seen from him before. 6 months later, he sent another letter with even more detailed plans for restitution. He had been working in the prison workshop, earning money that he was setting aside for victim compensation. He had also been corresponding with financial counselors about setting up a payment plan for when he was released. The letter included copies of forms he had filled out and research he had done about rebuilding my credit. The turning point came when he sent me a letter that included something I never expected: a detailed timeline of every fraudulent transaction he had made. He had reconstructed everything from memory, including which cards he used, what he bought, and where he was when he made each purchase. This information was crucial for the ongoing civil case against the credit card companies, and it showed he was finally taking full responsibility for his actions. His letters also revealed how prison had changed his perspective on family and relationships. He wrote about inmates who had lost everything because of their crimes, and how he was determined not to make the same mistakes. He described conversations with other prisoners about addiction and crime, and how he had learned to recognize the warning signs that led to his downfall. The person writing these letters seemed genuinely transformed by his experience. 2 years into his sentence, something happened that neither of us expected. A documentary filmmaker who had been following identity theft cases contacted me about featuring our story. The film was focused on family crime and the long-term effects on victims, and they wanted to interview both of us. At first, I was reluctant to relive the whole experience publicly, but the filmmaker convinced me that sharing our story could help other families avoid similar situations. The interview process was emotionally difficult, but also surprisingly healing. Talking to a neutral third party about what had happened helped me process feelings I had been carrying for years. The filmmaker asked tough questions about family loyalty, forgiveness, and justice that forced me to examine my own motivations and choices. They also arranged for me to have a video call with my cousin from prison, which was our first real conversation since the trial. Seeing him on that video call was shocking. He looked older, more mature, and genuinely remorseful in a way I had never seen before. He didn't make excuses or try to minimize what he had done, and he listened when I told him about how his actions had affected my life. We talked for over an hour about everything that had happened, and for the first time, I felt like I was talking to a real person rather than the manipulative addict who had betrayed me. The documentary was released 8 months later and received more attention than any of us expected. It aired on a major cable network and was featured in several news articles about family crime. The response from viewers was overwhelming, with hundreds of people sharing their own stories of family betrayal and financial fraud. Many viewers praised me for holding my cousin accountable, while others criticized me for sending a family member to prison. But the most unexpected response came from victim advocacy groups and financial institutions. The documentary had highlighted flaws in the credit monitoring system and the difficulty victims face in proving identity theft. Several organizations reached out to me about testifying before Congress about reforming identity theft laws, and I found myself becoming an accidental advocate for other victims. My cousin's release date was approaching, and I had to decide whether I was ready to have any kind of relationship with him. His letters had shown genuine change and remorse, but I couldn't forget the betrayal and the years of stress he had caused. The prison counselors had recommended family counseling after his release, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for that level of forgiveness. The day he was released, I drove to the prison to pick him up. It was a decision I had struggled with for months, but ultimately I felt like I needed to see for myself whether the change in his letters was real. When he walked out of those gates, he looked like a completely different person, thinner, more serious, and genuinely humble in a way I had never seen before. Our first conversation as free men was awkward and emotional, but it was also honest in a way our family had never experienced. He acknowledged everything he had done wrong and didn't try to rush past the difficult topics. He also presented me with a detailed plan for repaying the money he had stolen, including documentation of the job he had lined up and the payment schedule he had calculated. The road to rebuilding our relationship was long and difficult, but it was also surprisingly healing. He kept every promise he made about restitution, working double shifts to pay me back as quickly as possible. He also attended addiction counseling and financial literacy classes, taking responsibility for the underlying issues that had led to his crimes. Slowly, I began to see the person he had become rather than the person who had betrayed me. 3 years after his release, he made his final restitution payment, and we had a small family gathering to mark the occasion. It wasn't a celebration exactly, but it was a moment of closure that neither of us had expected to reach. He had paid back every penny he had stolen plus interest, and had rebuilt his life in a way that honored the promises he had made. The experience taught me that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the strongest relationships if both people are willing to do the hard work of healing. My cousin's time in prison had given him the opportunity to confront his demons and become a better person. My own journey through the legal system and recovery process had taught me about forgiveness, boundaries, and the difference between enabling and supporting someone. Looking back, I realized that pressing charges was the best thing I could have done for both of us. It held him accountable for his actions and gave him the wake-up call he needed to change his life. It also showed me that I was stronger than I thought and that I could survive even the worst betrayals. Our relationship today is different from what it was before, but it's also more honest and genuine than it ever was when we were just going through the motions of being family. The federal charges had given him time to think, and that time had transformed him from a selfish addict into a responsible adult who understood the real cost of his actions. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that save us, even when they come at a price that seems too high to pay.